With God, there is always more. More love, more life, more freedom. Welcome to Zoe's Exploring More with Michael Thompson. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Our Heavenly Father has provided many delightful inns for us along our journey, but He takes great care to see that we do not mistake any of them for home." Join me and the team as we explore the kingdom together, discovering the deep truths and offering encouragement for the journey. There is always more.
Hey listeners, it's SJ. And like many of you, as 2019 draws to a close, we are preparing for the holidays, celebrating what God has done in the past year. We're praying for guidance and casting vision for 2020. We're having meetings and strategic gatherings to prepare our hearts and our team for what God has planned for us in the next year. During those meetings, a team member brought up that many times people find a podcast like Exploring More that they enjoy, but then they don't go back and listen to previous episodes, missing out on some of the great content. So with that in mind, for the next few weeks, we're going to be revisiting our very first series called Being Fathered. We hope you'll enjoy it, and we'll be back in the studio recording all new episodes of the Exploring More podcast soon. Thank you.
So I'm here, Michael Thompson, with my friends Tom Benner and Jim Cheney and S.J. Jennings, and we just wanted to explore this whole idea of fatherhood for a little bit for the next few podcasts, and what it looks like to be fathered. And so when I ask that, or let me put it this way, what do you think of? How does it feel when I use that term, being fathered? What comes up in your hearts and minds?
Well, Michael, what comes up in me when I hear that term, being fathered, or that phrase, I think of being protected. I feel like, there's safety in that, especially when you're young and you just need some sense of protection from what's happening, and also being shown how to do stuff, how things work, you're trying to learn things, whether it's learning to ride a bicycle, or you want to play baseball, or you want to learn how to catch a ball or hit it. I mean, these are little things that as a young boy, I think we typically look to our father to teach us to do. Then later it might turn into something more in a professional realm. But I think the idea of a safe place, someone who's created an environment that you don't have to worry that something bad's going to happen to you.
Yeah, that's good. When I was thinking about, Tom, the whole being fathered as a subject, preparing just for our conversation, that was immediately one I thought about. Protected, provided for,
right.
A safe environment, provided instruction, provided counsel, encouragement, and there really is a lot of stages to this and phases to this. Being fathered, that's a good overarching kind of idea. Protected, provided. What about you guys, SJ, Tom, Jim?
Yeah, I think you would all agree that as younger men, we probably didn't appreciate fathering like we do now. It's something that we have maybe took for granted as a child or as a kid, and as we got older, learned the importance of it. So, I agree with Tom 100% that it is such an important role and such a safe place and such a opportunity for nourishment that all of us needed. Now, not all of us got it, but all of us needed it. Mm-hmm. And I think we appreciate it. Unfortunately, we appreciate it a lot more now than we did then.
Yeah, when it was happening. Yeah.
Yeah, I think too, Tom, what I think about, and Jim, you too, as you share that, it's less about how you're fathered, I think. My dad in particular, showed me how to work on vehicles, work on cars and engines and things like that. But it could have been anything else. It could have been gardening. It could have been modeling. It could have been, any number of things. It's more about the environment that's created by your father. That's the important part, creating that safe space, that nurturing feeling.
There's something else too implied in that, is that it's an intentional thing that a father does for a young boy that communicates the idea that you matter, that you are important, that your presence is seen and known, because I know so often many of us in our stories felt a lot of lack in that area sometimes. And so, but that phrase of fathering, being fathered, to me is a very proactive, intentional thing that a father does.
Oh, it's happening. I mean, an absent father, that's an environment. He's not there. I like what you brought up, SJ, about maybe working on cars. So what when you think back to what your father, your earthly father, what he gave you, where would you go? What were some of those instructions, especially maybe earlier on in your journey, boyhood? What were some of the things that your dad, how did he father you? Provided, protected, instructed, gave you an environment of a garage in which to connect with him and be able to enter into his world. What were some other examples of that?
For me, my dad was very intentional about teaching us character things, principles, like you don't lie, you think about other people, and you're considerate. And so those kind of things got sort of woven into the fabric of my heart very early, and really to work hard, to learn how to do things. He made us work. He made us get out and shovel the snow, even if it was only a quarter-inch thick, on the driveway.
Work ethic then?
Just because, get up before school, and that's your chore, that's your job. And so learning to work, learning to do what you don't want to do to get what you do want, which is either an allowance or that then translates into a job, and the excitement of getting a paycheck and being able to buy a car, or, the things that all young boys and young men go through. But I think that he really did ingrain in me some things that have served me really well in my life. And those started young. But it was mostly in terms of kind of principles that he taught us. He didn't really teach me too many. He wasn't really involved, in my sports activities or teaching me how to do stuff around the house, but because he was busy. He was very busy, but he did guide us. He made us be responsible for what we did and that kind of thing.
I was fortunate when I look back and compare my upbringing with my dad, how he fathered me. It was really hands-on. It was a lot of hands-on. There was a lot of balls and bats and throwing and catching and a lot of that. I mean, we've got pictures, the old Polaroids that are in the old family albums, lined up 6 on a sheet, those old family albums that we grew up with. And so, I mean, there's bats in our hands, there's balls in our hands, caps on. I mean, since we were boys, 3, 4, and 5, and that was part of it. I remember a lot of hands-on, and then he coached some of those early teams when Dad's coach. So I had my dad, at practice. I mean, he was the one dumping the bag of helmets and bats and balls out for all the other boys. So, he was a presence in a lot of boys' lives. And like you said, Jim, I don't think I knew. That was just my dad. I really didn't know what kind of environment he was creating for a lot of boys, and some of the things that maybe went into that. And helped with homework. I can remember the little bit of homework I did growing up. He was really brilliant. Had a physics and chemistry kind of background. I didn't even know all of that until later in his life. How sharp he was, how smart he was. But he knew science, he knew math, and so that was always. We had a tutor at home, and I think all our dads. I'd agree, Tom. All of them were busy, in some respect. But that intentionality was something that he fathered us, well in early years up through elementary school and in high school. I remember, having your dad be the coach was also one of those like, oh man, I want another coach.
Yeah.
Can somebody else be the coach of our team? But I look back now and it's really fond memories. But at the time, like you said, Jim, I don't think I had a category to appreciate his involvement, his engagement. In fathering us by being present.
Do you have any memories of your dad stepping into that role for other kids? Kind of a fathering role?
Oh, yeah. Especially Little League Baseball was baseball, and then some basketball were a couple teams he coached. And, there were boys in the early 70s without a dad, so we had a station wagon, an old, Griswold-looking station wagon, and, he'd had to pick up 3 or 4 boys before we'd go to practice, so I didn't know how early we left. It just was, that was part of the routine. He was picking up boys and dropping them off. And those boys couldn't have lived that close, because most boys back then, we rode our bikes, into those kind of environments. But yeah, that was a way. And he was an encourager. It was part of his DNA. He was a cheerleader, encourager, and he had a laugh that, boys enjoyed. I remember him, probably laughing at us as much as laughing with us, but I think just certain kids, tickle adults. And so, on those teams, that was true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my dad, we spent time, like I said, I referenced, working on vehicles. He showed me how to do that. And we spent time together, but it was kind of in between. He was there, but he was a little more absent at the same time. There was a measure of busyness to it. But, being the youngest of 5 and being born for my parents a little bit late in life, I think my dad was mid-40s when I came along. So I don't have a whole lot of memories of him and I doing recreational things together, or even a lot of intentional, like in retrospect, I can look back and say, oh, there's an intentional moment where my dad was fathering me. He instilled, character traits, and there was an expectation, if you're a member of our family, this is how you behave, this is how you don't behave. But those fathering moments were pretty scarce. So it's sort of this in-between of, we spent time together, but it was to accomplish certain tasks and things that he wasn't my dad was confined to a wheelchair, so there were some things he couldn't do. Mm-hmm. So it was mostly related to that.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So my story is a little bit more like yours, Scott. I'm a little bit older, and so my dad was a returning World War II vet. And that's, the generation they called the Great Generation, and he was anything but expressive. He was hardworking. He got married right away when he got back, had 6 kids right away, and so he worked all the time. And so the one thing that I do remember, his presence in his sports. He loved football, and as a result, of course, I played football. And he made a point of picking me up at practice or being at the game. I could remember seeing him in the end zone, standing behind the fence. So he was good about that, but there wasn't many other moments of any kind of tenderness or connection. He did not exhibit the ability to show affection very easily. Mm-hmm. So my dad, I would characterize as distant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It seems to be something God has set in us that we do long for validation. We long for the attention of somebody. And so when you talk about, at the beginning of the podcast, this being fathered, it's a safe environment, provision, protection. But you're adding a dimension to all of that, Jim, with words. What's said, how it's said. Do you think back to any validating moments where there was a moment your dad said something that had some real substance? I mean, your heart knew it. Any stories about how that validating moment looked?
I can think of one in particular. We were driving in our family through the busy streets of downtown Chicago, and when my brother, who was on the outside of the back seat, he was on the door side. Evidently, he didn't shut the door hard enough, or it didn't latch, and we went around this corner, and he just went tumbling out in the middle of this intersection in Chicago. And so here we are in the hospital, and he had blood all over his face. You know how head wounds are. He hit his head, and it was really, really traumatic. And I remember sitting in the waiting room with my dad, and I just wanted so bad to cry. And I just felt so bad, but I was trying not to. And he just looked at me and he said, "It's okay. It's okay to cry." I mean, that sounds kind of very simple, but in that moment, that was one of the biggest memories of a heart connection with my dad about something that was, troubling to me. Yeah. And he just made me feel like it's going to be okay, but don't be afraid to cry. Which, that's not the message that a lot of boys get from their dads.
How old were you then, Tom?
I was probably 7 or 8.
Yeah.
But but it was just so good, to just let that go, let those tears come,
Ironically, that seems like the most tender moment I have with my dad, the one I remember the best, is the very first memory I have, which is, quite unusual. I think that, I was 4 years old maybe, and I apparently was afraid of the rain and the lightning and the thunder. And he came home from work, and we lived in a little apartment, and my mom suggested to him that he'd take me outside, and you put me in a raincoat and carried me outside, and we just got wet and enjoyed the rain and thunder. And he said, "It's okay, it's okay." And it's a wonderful memory, but unfortunately, it's the only tenderness memory I have of him. He was so distant. I guess with more kids and with more busyness, and like most of us, most of the fathers, we don't get much training, and he apparently didn't have much training.
That's a good memory, though.
It's a great memory.
Yeah, I can see that in my mind's eye. That's a good memory.
Yeah, as I expressed, I don't have a lot of memories of my dad as what I would call fathering me, in a moment similar to what you're describing, Tom. He was very loving and expressed that, great memory I have of him is being younger and hugging him before bed. And, by then, as a man, you have a pretty good 5 o'clock shadow going on. And I remember the roughness of his face, against my little boy skin on my face. That's a great memory. But one where he affirmed me, the most vivid one I have, I think, is a couple years before he died. I think in about 1992, I was married maybe the year before. And he was a history buff. He was really, really into the Civil War and had this book where he had compiled several articles and that about the Civil War. And they were very in-depth and included troop movements and all that kind of thing. It was one of his treasured possessions. And it was fairly old. And he took that book and wrote a letter to me in the front of it and gave it to me as a wedding gift, the Christmas after I got married. And wrote in there how proud he was of me and how much he loved that we both loved history and that kind of thing. And that was a great moment and still is when I go back to it and open it up periodically and read it again.
Right, that seems to be just one of the great ingredients, that can be passed along. Something validating the "I'm proud of you," "I love you" at any age. We talk to men a lot in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and it still seems to be part of a longing.
Oh, sure.
I remember a couple of years ago at one of our conferences, just telling the men in the audience, there were several hundred in the audience, and I said, "Hey, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you for getting here. I'm proud of you for working through it." So the first session that night, this guy from Nebraska comes beelining for me, and he said, "You don't know how significant what you said was." And I thought it was going to be something real profound, like, "Yeah, tell me, what did I say that was really cool?" I said, "Well, what was it?" And he said, "You said you were proud of me." I mean, he felt like I was talking to him, and I was. But it just shows us that we're wired for that, and to be fathered in that, the role of a father. I want to talk a little bit about Jesus and how he viewed the Father. And we've talked about this passage in Luke 3:22 when Jesus is baptized and the Holy Spirit descends, and then you hear this passage says, then a voice from heaven declares, "This is my Son, in whom I'm well pleased." I mean, the paraphrase is really easy, right? "This is my boy, and I am proud of him." Right? When you hear that passage, are you able to translate it that way? Was that how you've always understood that? That it was a validating ceremony from the Father, fathering the Son, and how that must have landed in Jesus's heart, like our stories land in our heart.
Yeah, I think from an analytic perspective, I can see it that way, no question. But even before that, I read that and I go, man, I want some of that. Yeah. I need some of that. It's a core desire for me and my heart to be told by my Father that he's He's proud of me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, more than I want to hear that more than I want to hear "I love you" on many levels.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
When I think about that, I don't think I ever saw it from the perspective of Jesus's heart in that moment. I always thought he was sort of telling everybody else that was there, "This is my son." And it was only in recent years that we started talking about what did that do for Jesus,
Right.
and that was, I think, a very important moment for him, especially before he went into this experience of battle and in the wilderness, and just the shoring up of him. You know, sometimes I think we forget about his humanity, and in the same way that we need that same level of acknowledgement and validation from our fathers, I think he did too, as a man, as a human. As a human part of him absolutely needed to hear that.
Yeah, the Gospels are clear: Son of God and Son of Man. I mean, this wild King of the universe, Christ of our hearts, has got this, enters into the story as a human being, as a boy, and becomes a man, and enters into this mission. I mean, it's really a crucial time in the story of Jesus' life, and the mission is about to go all on, DEFCON 5, because you're right. We're going to talk in a little bit about, in the next podcast, even about how validating that was as he enters into then this situation of being led into the wilderness, where that's what he encounters. It's that very validation is brought into question.
You can almost think of it as he had 30 years of preparation for this 3.5-year mission, and this is the key transition point.
Yeah.
This is the moment when the real work is about to begin and the preparation is over.
Yeah, I wrote, it's so good that you said that, and maybe this is a good one to end on. I wrote a note about thinking about this Luke 3:22 passage, and it says, and I wrote this: when God the Father declared this, and Jesus the Son heard this, it ushered in a new theme within the gospel story: the weightiness and significance of a father's love to a son's heart would carry him through the mission to the cross, the resurrection, and back to the right hand of the Father. I mean, you're right. It's a big moment in the gospel story. So, well, yeah, being fathered, what a great topic to talk about. Obviously, we can't get it all in one, so we're going to have a series of podcasts on being fathered and what it looks like, even as transitioning into our fatherhood in some of the podcasts ahead. So thank you, men, for joining us on exploring more, and we'll look forward to the next time.
Great.
Yep, sounds good.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Exploring More. The landing page for this podcast is zoe.org/podcast. That's ZOWEH.org/podcast, where you can find the show notes and various platforms to which we broadcast. You can also find us and the Life of More by visiting Zoe on YouVersion Bible app, Right Now Media, our Facebook page, and Zoe on Instagram and Twitter. Remember, with God there is always more, and you were made for more.